We're tackling a pretty heavy but super important topic, the experience of loneliness, specifically from a Christian perspective.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a universal experience, right?
Absolutely. But we're going to look at it through, a particular lens today. We've got some scriptural references and commentary from Temple's Table.
Good.
They're episode 43, and it's called, very appropriately, Lonely.
I like how they just cut to the chase with the title. No beating around the bush.
Right. Straight to the heart of it. So it's not like, your typical self-help kind of thing. It's looking at what the Bible, the Scripture has to say about this feeling, this experience of loneliness.
Using those ancient texts to shed light on something we all still struggle with today. I love that approach.
Me too. And they even weave in their own commentary to help us understand how these scriptures might actually apply to our modern lives.
Makes it way more relatable, for sure.
For sure. So what are some of the big themes they cover?
Well, they explore a whole range of themes, actually, starting with patience and obedience. Okay.
Then they go into rejection, fear, and then kind of flip it to talk about God's presence, the importance of belief, and the concept of refuge.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack in one episode. Where do they even begin with all of that?
Well, they kick things off by emphasizing the importance of patience. Even when we feel lonely, having patience and contentment in faith. They really ground this in Hebrews 13.5.
Okay, I'm familiar with that one. But for someone who's, really wrestling with loneliness, what does that actually mean for them? Is it saying we'll never feel those feelings?
That's a great question. And actually, the episode does a good job of explaining that. It's not saying we'll never feel alone, right? But rather that God's presence is this constant, even in the midst of those feelings.
So it's about recognizing that deeper connection, even when our emotions are screaming something else.
Exactly. And they link this directly to obedience, too, citing Matthew 28.20, reminding us that when we follow God's commands, we're walking in His presence.
Right.
And that brings a sense of closeness, a sense of purpose, even in solitude. It's like, those times when you feel most connected to God are when you're actively living out your faith, not just like thinking about it.
100%. It's about action, not just contemplation. And then to address that feeling of rejection that often comes with loneliness, they bring in 1 Samuel 12.22.
Okay.
It emphasizes that God has chosen His people and won't reject them, offering that feeling of belonging, of security.
So even when we feel rejected by others, we can still find solace in knowing that we are chosen, that we are accepted by God unconditionally.
Exactly. And they don't shy away from the fear aspect either, the fear that often comes with loneliness. They bring in Isaiah 41.10 to remind us that God is our strength, our support, especially when we're distressed.
Like an anchor, when the storms of life and those feelings of isolation feel overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. And that sense of security, they take it a step further. In John 14.18, Jesus promises to return, not to leave believers as orphans.
So it's not just about enduring loneliness, but there's this element of hope, of looking forward to a future where we'll be reunited with Christ fully.
That's the beautiful promise woven into that verse.
It is. And a promise that relies on belief, which is another theme they hit on. They pull from John 14.1, right? Encouraging us to have faith in both God and Jesus.
Yeah, they present faith as like a foundation, right, in combating loneliness.
It seems like without that, it's tough to grasp these truths, these promises.
Absolutely. And to wrap it up, they offer this really vivid image from Deuteronomy 33.27, describing God as our refuge, a place of safety and strength against any enemy.
Even the enemy of loneliness.
Especially that one, they seem to suggest. It's powerful stuff.
It is. They've given us like this whole spiritual toolkit for dealing with those feelings of isolation. I love it.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In the Temple's Table summary, they bring all these threads together, highlight some key takeaways.
Let's dive into that, because one of the things that jumps out, at least to me, is that they make a point of saying that loneliness isn't just about being physically alone.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting, because I think a lot of people assume that, if you're not physically isolated, you can't be lonely.
Like it's all about how many people are around you.
But they actually make a point of saying that you can be surrounded by people, even loved ones, and still feel deeply, deeply lonely.
That's so true. It's an emotional state, not just a physical circumstance.
Exactly. Temple's Table suggests that the real way to overcome this kind of deep loneliness is through understanding our reconciliation with God through Jesus Christ.
So it's not just about like getting more human interaction,
Yeah.
but about nurturing our relationship with God.
Yeah. They're arguing that true connection, the kind that combats loneliness at its core, comes from understanding and embracing that relationship with God. And they keep coming back to God's promise to never leave or forsake us, which ties in beautifully, right? That idea of finding solace in a divine connection.
It's a comforting message, for sure, for anyone battling loneliness. But they also go back to the very beginning, don't they? To the origins of loneliness.
You're right. It's not just a modern-day phenomenon. They trace it all the way back to the book of Genesis, chapters 2 and 3, looking at the roots of loneliness and desire. They start with the creation of Eve,
Okay.
suggesting that, this human need for companionship, it's like woven into our very being.
So it's not just some new invention of our modern world. It's been with us from the start.
Exactly. And they connect this inherent need for companionship with the consequences of, sin, the expulsion from Eden. They talk about pain, childbirth, desire, all tied to our separation from God and then, consequently from each other.
Wow. So they're suggesting that loneliness, desire, suffering, all these things stem from that original break, that break in our relationship with God.
They are. And it's against this backdrop of brokenness and longing that they introduce the words of Jesus from John 14:27, offering a peace that surpasses, worldly understanding. It's like a sliver of hope. In the midst of all this talk about the origins of loneliness, a promise of peace, even in a world that's marked by separation and suffering.
Powerful stuff. And then they take it a step further, connecting it to Matthew 11:28-30, where Jesus invites those who are, weary, burdened, to find rest in him.
So they're not just, dwelling on the problem. They're actually offering a solution, a path out of loneliness through a relationship with Jesus.
Exactly. True peace and rest, the kind that actually heals those wounds of loneliness. They argue that it can only be found in Christ. And to really drive this point home, this message of hope and resilience, they talk about Romans 8:35-39.
Another one of those encouraging passages. What do they pull from it?
They highlight the reminder that, nothing can separate believers from God's love.
Right.
Powerful message, right? Especially when you're wrestling with feelings of isolation, because it speaks to this unbreakable bond that goes beyond our circumstances, a lifeline. When the waves are crashing all around you, no matter how intense those feelings of loneliness get, that connection remains.
Exactly. And they point out that this connection, it fuels a triumphant spirit. That enables believers to actually overcome those feelings of isolation. It's not about ignoring the pain, but about tapping into a source of strength that allows us to move through it without being consumed by it.
It's about resilience, not just surviving loneliness, but overcoming it through faith.
Exactly. And then to really solidify this whole idea, this hope, they unpack 2 Corinthians 5:18-21, which is all about reconciliation with God through Christ. It's not just about, finding comfort in God's presence, but actually being a part of that reconciliation.
That's interesting. What does it mean to actively participate in that, especially when you're feeling so isolated and disconnected?
Well, they propose this idea that believers become ambassadors of this reconciliation. Extending God's love and forgiveness to others. It's about, sharing that experience of healing, of connection, and in turn, deepening our own sense of belonging.
So it's not just about receiving, but about becoming a conduit, sharing God's love with a world that so desperately needs it.
Exactly. It's recognizing that we're all part of something bigger, woven together by God's grace, and by embracing that interconnectedness, by reaching out, by sharing love. That's how we combat loneliness, not just for ourselves, but for others too.
I love that. Loneliness as a catalyst for connection.
It's a powerful shift in perspective, for sure.
It really is. We started this deep dive, with this feeling of heaviness. But I feel like we're seeing it through a totally different lens now, one of hope, of connection, of spiritual growth even.
It's amazing what reframing can do. By exploring these scriptures and the commentary from Temple's Table, we've uncovered a way to not just cope with loneliness, but transform it.
They've given us a roadmap, a way to navigate those feelings, and come out on the other side with a deeper understanding of ourselves and our relationship with God. But I think, at the end of the day, it boils down to one central message.
What's that?
We are not alone. Whether we find that comfort in God's presence, in the love of those around us, or even in the act of serving others, we're all part of something bigger than ourselves.
That's a beautiful truth to hold on to, especially when those shadows of loneliness start to creep in. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, there's always hope.
Absolutely. So for you listening, what does all this actually mean?
It means that loneliness, Yeah, it's painful, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can actually push us toward growth, connection, and a much deeper understanding of God's love.
It's an invitation, almost, right? To lean in to our
Yeah.
faith, to nurture that relationship with God, and to become a conduit, I think you called it, of His love to others.
Yeah, exactly. I love how they reframe this whole experience. It's not an ending, but a beginning, a starting point for healing, for growth, for a deeper connection with God.
Absolutely. And if this deep dive has, kind of sparked something in you or left you with questions, I definitely encourage you to go back to those scriptures we talked about, listen to that Temple's Cable episode again, maybe even seek out some spiritual guidance of your own. It's all about continuing this exploration, this journey, discovering how faith can bring light into those dark moments, lead us to a place of hope and connection. Thanks for being here with us today, and may you find peace and comfort in the truth that you are never truly alone.
It's funny, we started this deep dive talking about this really heavy topic, loneliness, but I actually feel so much lighter now.
Me too. It's amazing how exploring these scriptures and, listening to that Temple's Table episode can shift our whole perspective.
Totally. We've gone from feeling the weight of loneliness to seeing it as this opportunity for growth and connection. It's like they've given us this new lens to look through, a lens of hope and spiritual understanding.
It's like they've handed us a flashlight to navigate those dark and lonely spaces. And it all comes back to that central message, doesn't it?
What's that?
We are not alone. Even when it feels like we are, that connection to something bigger, whether it's God or loved ones or even just a sense of purpose, that's what pulls us through.
And that's a powerful truth to hold on to, especially when those shadows of loneliness start to creep back in. It's a reminder that no matter how tough things get, there's always hope, always a way forward.
Absolutely. So for you listening, what does all this mean for your own journey?
Well, it means that loneliness, as tough as it is, it doesn't have to define you. It can be this catalyst for growth, for deeper connection, and, for an even richer understanding of God's love.
It's a call to action almost,
Yeah.
to lean into your faith, nurture that relationship with God, and become, like you said earlier, an ambassador of His love to others.
Exactly. Spread that light, that hope, that connection. It's contagious.
It really is. And if this deep dive has stirred something in you, if you have questions or you just want to keep exploring these ideas, don't stop here. Go back to those scriptures we talked about. Listen to Temple's Table again, or even seek out your own spiritual guidance.
It's all about continuing that journey, that exploration, discovering how faith can illuminate even the darkest parts of our lives and lead us toward a place of true hope and connection.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. May you find peace and comfort in knowing that you are never truly alone.